There is an island in Japan where people seem to have forgotten how to die. And not as a figure of speech, statistically, 1 in every 10 residents of this island lives past 100 years old. They don't take pharmaceutical drugs. They don't follow Western diet advice. They don't count calories, track macros, or pay for subscriptions to wellness apps. They eat a plant every single day, in their soup, in their tea, in recipes their grandmothers taught them before the Second World War. This plant bleeds yellow, not white sap, not clear liquid, bright golden yellow, like turmeric, like caution tape, like something your body was never supposed to forget. When you cut a leaf from this plant at dawn, a new leaf grows back by the following morning. The Japanese named it accordingly. They call it tomorrow's leaf. It contains a compound found in no other plant scientists have ever tested, a compound that signals your cells to clean themselves, to remove the damaged proteins, the broken components, the cellular debris that accumulates over decades and becomes cancer, becomes Alzheimer's, becomes the diseases we've been conditioned to accept as inevitable. In 2016, a team of researchers in Austria isolated this compound and ran it through some of the most standard organisms used in aging science: yeast cells, fruit flies, roundworms. In every single case, the organisms lived longer. And in every single case, the mechanism was the same. The compound triggered autophagy. If you're not familiar with autophagy, this is the process your body uses to take out its own cellular garbage. It's the reason intermittent fasting has shown real health benefits. It's the reason caloric restriction extends lifespan in laboratory animals. Scientists have known about autophagy for decades. In 2016, a Japanese cell biologist won the Nobel Prize specifically for his work on it. This plant activates the same process without fasting, without hunger, without a prescription. The researchers published their findings in Nature Communications, one of the most respected scientific journals on the planet. The title was clinical, as academic titles tend to be, but the translation is simple. This plant makes your cells take out their own garbage, and organisms that eat it live longer. That is not folk medicine. That is not anecdote. That is peer-reviewed, replicated, published science.
So, where does this plant come from? The history begins in exile. Hachijojima Island sits 290 kilometers south of Tokyo, rising out of the Philippine Sea like a place the rest of Japan tried to forget. Volcanic soil, harsh winds, humidity that destroys most crops before harvest. For centuries, this island was used as a dumping ground, a place where the Japanese government sent criminals, political dissidents, and inconvenient nobles when they wanted them to disappear. They were supposed to suffer. They were supposed to die. They didn't. The exiles discovered a plant growing wild on the volcanic cliffs. It thrived in conditions that killed everything else. It grew so aggressively that cutting it only made it multiply. And when they ate it, because they had nothing else, they noticed something strange. They stopped getting sick. Not magically, not completely, but measurably, undeniably. The exiles of Hachijojima outlived their peers on the mainland. They outlived their guards. Some of them outlived the very emperors who had sentenced them. Word spread. By the Edo-period, this plant was no longer a survival food. It was medicine. Samurai consumed it before battle for stamina. Mothers gave it to their children to fight off illness. Farmers chewed the stems during harvest for energy. One 18th century shogun became so convinced of its power that he ordered the plant cultivated on the mainland and then immediately restricted its export. He didn't want rival clans gaining access to it. The plant was strategic. The plant was protected. The plant was considered power. Then the Americans arrived. After World War II, the U.S. occupation restructured Japan's food systems from the ground up. Traditional foods were quietly deprioritized. Western agriculture was pushed in. Within one generation, this plant retreated back to the islands. The mainland forgot, but the islands remembered. Today, both Hachijojima and Okinawa, the two regions where consumption of this plant never stopped, contain the highest concentrations of centenarians per capita anywhere on Earth. Okinawa alone has 5 times as many people over 100 per capita as the United States. They didn't achieve this through pharmaceuticals. They didn't achieve this through supplements or biohacking or cold plunges. They achieved this by continuing to eat what their great-great-grandparents ate: a plant that bleeds yellow, a plant that grows back overnight, a plant that most Americans have never tasted. The plant is called Ashitaba.
Here is the part that should make you stop and think. You cannot buy Ashitaba fresh in America. You will not find it in any grocery store. The FDA has never approved a single health claim for it. Most Americans have never even heard its name. That is not an accident. Here is how American food regulation actually works. A company can sell you a food if it is generally recognized as safe, what the industry calls GRAS status. Foods with a long history of traditional use get this
purchase automatically. Novel or foreign foods require extensive testing, documentation, and formal approval. Ashitaba has been eaten safely in Japan for over 300 years, but in the United States, it is classified as novel and foreign, and that classification requires proof. Who pays for that proof? Not the government, the company that wants to sell it. A full FDA approval pathway for a new food ingredient costs somewhere between $1 and $5 million. Clinical trials, safety documentation, compliance reviews, legal fees. And here's the problem. Ashitaba is a plant. You cannot patent a plant. Any company that spends millions pushing Ashitaba through the approval process would simply be opening the market for every competitor to sell the same thing at a lower price. Nobody will pay. The math doesn't work. So, Ashitaba sits in regulatory limbo. You can buy it as a dietary supplement, but no health claims are allowed on the label. You can sometimes find imported powder, often marked not for human consumption, just to avoid FDA scrutiny. But you cannot find it fresh. You cannot find it in the produce section. You cannot find advertising that tells you what the science actually says it does. Meanwhile, consider what Ashitaba threatens. Metformin, the diabetes drug now being studied as a longevity compound, works partially by activating autophagy. Rapamycin, the immunosuppressant being researched as an anti-aging drug, works by activating autophagy. These are pharmaceutical products with patent protection, profit margins, and billion-dollar research budgets behind them. Ashitaba activates autophagy, but Ashitaba cannot be patented. Ashitaba cannot be monopolized. Ashitaba cannot generate the kind of returns that justify pharmaceutical investment, so the research stays buried in journals most Americans will never read. The plant stays confined to specialty importers most people will never find, and the knowledge stays locked in island communities most people will never visit. This is not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense, no boardroom of villains making decisions in the dark. It is something quieter and more structural than that. It is a system functioning exactly as it was designed to function, a system where a food that cannot be patented cannot be promoted, where knowledge that cannot be monetized cannot be distributed, where the longest living people on Earth eat something every single day that most Americans have never been allowed to access. The plant is not illegal. The truth is worse. The plant is unprofitable. And in America, those two things operate almost identically. Here is what you can actually do about it. You can grow Ashitaba yourself. The plant is hardy in USDA zones 7 through 10. It tolerates partial shade. It actually prefers the kind of benign neglect that kills most garden vegetables. Seeds are available from specialty suppliers. Live plants ship from small nurseries. One plant produces dozens of leaves per season. Cut it today, harvest again tomorrow. The name is not poetry. The name is a literal description of how this plant grows. If you live somewhere colder, Ashitaba grows in containers. Bring it inside for winter. A single pot on a windowsill produces enough leaves for weekly consumption, the same frequency the centenarians of Okinawa have maintained for 3 centuries. The taste is green and slightly bitter. Think celery crossed with parsley. The Japanese add it to soups, to tempura, to tea. Leaves can be dried and powdered. Stems can be juiced. Every part is edible. Every part contains that yellow sap. Every part carries the compound that Western science confirmed and Western commerce quietly ignored. You do not need FDA approval to grow a plant. You do not need pharmaceutical permission to eat a leaf. You do not need anyone's authorization to access what the longest living humans on Earth have known for centuries. The centenarians of Okinawa did not wait for a clinical trial. They did not wait for a doctor to recommend it. They did not wait for someone to tell them what their grandparents already knew. They ate the leaf, and they outlived everyone who didn't. Tomorrow's leaf. The name was never just about the plant's ability to regenerate overnight. It was always about something else. It was about yours. If this reached you, subscribe before this gets buried. We cover the plants, the foods, and the forgotten knowledge that the mainstream would prefer stayed forgotten. Hit the notification bell. Share this with someone who deserves to know. The knowledge is free, but only if it keeps moving.